My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stared at my reflection in the black screen of my monitor, but I couldn't hold my own gaze. The numbers on the spreadsheet in front of me weren't just numbers anymore. They were a timeline of my betrayal, a detailed map of every lie I'd told my best friend. It was all right there, in black and white and glaring, unforgiving red. I had transferred the last of the company's emergency fund, $47,500, into a private account I'd set up 3 months ago. The one Mark didn't know about. The one I told myself was a necessary buffer, just in case. A cold sweat prickled on the back of my neck. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it felt like a frantic, trapped bird slamming against my ribs. This was it. The quarterly review was in 2 hours. Mark would log into the shared books, his trusting, easygoing smile would vanish, and he would see it. He would see the slow bleed of funds, the fabricated vendor payments, the carefully constructed lies I'd built to hide the fact that I was stealing from the company we'd built together from the ground up. I was stealing from him, from his family, from his kids, who called me Uncle Jake. I closed my eyes trying to pray, but the words were ash in my mouth. Forgive me felt like a mockery. How could I ask for forgiveness for something I was still doing, for a sin I had meticulously planned and executed for nearly a year? I wasn't a thief in a moment of desperation. I was a CEO, a deacon at my church, a man people supposedly looked up to who had become a careful, calculating embezzler. The weight of it pressed down on me so heavy I thought my chair might buckle. I was about to lose everything: my business, my best friend, my reputation, maybe even my family. And in that silent, suffocating moment, surrounded by the expensive oak desk and the framed degrees, I knew with a terrifying certainty that I had already lost my soul. But to understand how I got here, I need to take you back to where it all began. It started with a dream, not a nightmare. 8 years ago, Mark and I were crammed into my tiny garage in Charlotte, North Carolina, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of fresh-cut pine. We were both 28, fueled by cheap coffee and a big idea. He was the quiet, brilliant engineer who could design anything. I was the loud, people person who could sell it. Thompson and Miller Custom Furniture, he'd said, holding up a rough sketch of a dining table. It has a good ring to it. I'd clapped him on the back, grinning. Miller and Thompson sounds better, I'd joked, and he'd just smiled that steady, dependable smile of his. The order doesn't matter, Jake. It's the and that counts. For years, that and was everything. We built the business like we built our first pieces of furniture, with patience, sweat, and a shared belief in creating something beautiful and solid. We celebrated our first big contract by taking our wives out to a steakhouse, laughing because we could barely afford the side salads. When my son Liam was born, Mark was his first visitor at the hospital, holding him with a look of such pure, awkward joy. We weren't just partners. We were family. The trouble started so slowly, I didn't even recognize it as trouble. It began as a whisper, a subtle shift in my own heart. The business grew. We moved out of the garage, into a real workshop, then a small office, and finally a sleek suite in a professional complex in downtown Phoenix. The money got better. A lot better. But my appetite for it grew faster. It wasn't about providing for my family anymore, it was about the lifestyle. The bigger house in the better zip code, the luxury SUV, the pressure to keep up with neighbors who vacationed in places I couldn't pronounce. I started to resent Mark's simplicity. He was content with his modest home, his used car, his family camping trips. I saw it not as contentment, but as a lack of ambition. I began to feel like I was carrying the weight of the company's financial success on my own shoulders. The whispers in my heart got louder. You deserve more. You're the reason this is working. What's a little extra for all your hard work? Before I continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. It means the world to me to know who's hearing this story. The first time I crossed the line, it was almost an accident. It was a $500 expense for a client dinner that never happened. I justified it. I'd been working late. I'd missed my daughter's recital. The company owed me. The system was so easy to manipulate. Mark trusted me implicitly with the finances. He was busy designing, creating, and I was managing. The $500 became $1,000, then $2,000. It became a separate credit card for business expenses that only I saw. I'd look at Mark across the conference table during our weekly meetings, his face open and honest, and a knot of guilt would tighten in my stomach. But I'd silence it. It's for the good of the company, I'd tell myself. He doesn't need to be burdened with this. I'm handling it. One Tuesday afternoon, about a year into the spiral, my wife, Chloe, found me in my home office, staring blankly at a bank statement. "Jake," she said, her voice soft with concern, "you've been in here for hours. Is everything okay with the business?" I pasted on a smile, the one I'd gotten so good at. "Everything's great, honey. Just a lot of numbers." She came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "You've been so stressed lately. Distant. We miss you." I looked up at her, at the love and trust in her eyes. And for a single, terrifying second, I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to confess and let the whole crumbling mess fall down. But the fear was too great. I just squeezed her hand and said, "I know. I'm sorry. It's just a busy season." She believed me. Everyone always believed me. That was the problem. The lies were building a wall around me, brick by brick. I was attending church every Sunday, singing the hymns, even teaching a men's small group. But my faith had become a performance. I'd talk about God's provision while secretly siphoning money from my own company. I'd pray for wisdom while making choices steeped in pure foolishness and greed. The gap between the man I pretended to be and the man I was becoming was a chasm, and I was falling fast. And the whole time, I could feel God's quiet conviction, a gentle, persistent pressure on my heart that I worked overtime to ignore. Then, the roof started to cave in. A major client unexpectedly pulled out of a huge project, leaving a massive hole in our cash flow. The buffer I had stolen was the exact amount we needed to cover payroll and our overhead for the next 2 months. The money was gone. I had spent it on stupid, frivolous things, a watch, a vacation, pointless upgrades to my home theater. The quarterly review, where Mark and I went over the finances together, was suddenly a countdown to my own execution. I had days to figure it out. I tried to get a loan, but the bank needed both our signatures. I thought about taking out a second mortgage, but Chloe would have to know. I was trapped, panicked, and out of options. I started transferring smaller amounts from our emergency fund, telling myself I'd pay it back as soon as I got my next bonus. But it was a lie. I was just digging the hole deeper. Faster. That's what led me to this moment, sitting at my desk, staring at the final, damning transfer I'd just made. It was the last of our safety net. I had gambled with our company's future and lost, and in my panic, I had burned the last lifeboat to hide my own crime. I heard Mark's cheerful whistle echo down the hall. He was early. My breath hitched. I quickly closed the spreadsheet and opened a fake invoice, my hands trembling so badly I could barely type. The door to my office swung open. "Jake, you're in early," Mark said, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He placed one on my desk, his usual gesture of kindness feeling like a physical blow. He looked so normal, so trusting. He had no idea the storm that was about to hit. He leaned against my desk, taking a sip from his mug. "You ready for the quarterly review?" I was looking at the preliminary numbers last night. That dip from the Carlson account hurt, but I had a few ideas to pivot. "I think we can weather this." I couldn't look at him. I stared at the coffee cup, the rich, warm smell making me nauseous. My mouth was dry. I had to say something. I had to tell him, now, before he logged in and saw the truth for himself. "Mark," I started, my voice a ragged croak. He looked at me, his smile fading slightly, noticing the panic on my face for the first time. "Jake, you okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." I took a shaky breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it, the point of no return. "Mark," I said again, forcing myself to meet his confused, concerned eyes. "We need to talk. It's about the books." The words hung in the air between us, toxic and heavy. "It's about the books." Mark's face didn't change at first. It was like the information was traveling too slowly to reach him. He blinked, his head tilting just a fraction. The books? What about them? Did we get hit with a weird tax thing? He was trying to solve a problem, the way he always did. He was looking for a fixable glitch, a broken piece of code in the system. He had no idea the entire system was built on my lies. My throat tightened. I looked down at my hands, clenched into white-knuckled fists on the expensive desk. I couldn't do this looking at him. "No," I whispered, the words scraping out. "It's not a tax thing. It's me." The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. It was thick and suffocating. I could hear the hum of the computer, the distant sound of traffic 10 stories below, the frantic beating of my own heart. "You," he finally said, his voice low and careful. "Jake, what are you talking about?" There was no elegant way to say it, no gentle transition. I had to just say the words. I forced my head up. His eyes, usually so calm and focused, were wide with confusion. "I've been taking money from the company." I said it fast, like ripping off a bandage. "For about a year. I set up an account. I falsified expenses. I emptied the emergency fund." I watched the understanding dawn on his face. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, horrifying erosion. The confusion in his eyes melted away, replaced by a dawning disbelief, then a sharp, painful clarity. The color drained from his face. He slowly straightened up, stepping back from my desk as if I were contagious. "You... what?" he breathed. He wasn't asking for clarification. He was just trying to process the impossible. "The $47,500, I said, my voice trembling. "It's gone. I took it. I'm so sorry, Mark. I am so sorry." The apologies felt useless. Pathetic little rags trying to clean up a nuclear blast. He stared at me, his jaw working. He looked from my face to the computer screen and back again, as if trying to reconcile the two images. The friend he knew with the crime I was describing. "Why?" The word was a punch. It wasn't a gentle question. It was a demand, filled with a raw, bleeding hurt. "Jake, for God's sake, why?" What could I say? That I wanted a bigger TV? That I felt underappreciated? That I was jealous of his simple happiness? There was no reason that wouldn't sound monstrous. "I don't know," I choked out, which was the biggest lie of all. I did know. It was greed, it was pride, it was sin, plain and simple. He let out a short, harsh breath that was almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. None. "You don't know." He repeated my words flatly. He ran a hand through his hair, his movements jerky. "A year? You've been lying to me for a year?" The magnitude of it was finally sinking in. The weekly meetings where I'd presented the numbers. The conversations about our kids' futures. The prayers we'd said together in this very office when times were tough. All of it was a performance. "Mark, Don't," he cut me off, his voice sharp as broken glass. He held up a hand, his eyes blazing with a pain so deep it physically hurt to look at. "Just don't say another word." He turned away from me, his shoulders stiff. He walked over to the window and stared out at the Phoenix skyline. The city we'd built our dream in. I just sat there, paralyzed, waiting for the yelling, the accusations, the rage I deserved. But it didn't come. The silence was worse. It was filled with the sound of our friendship disintegrating. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low and terribly calm. How much total? I had the number memorized. It was burned into my soul. $400, I whispered. He flinched as if I'd struck him. He nodded slowly, still staring out the window. 89,000, he repeated, almost to himself. That's Beth's teaching salary for 2 years. That's the college fund for the kids. He turned around, and the look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated grief. You didn't steal from a company, Jake. You stole from my family. You stood in my living room last week and ate my wife's lasagna. That broke me. A sob I didn't even know was building ripped its way out of my chest. I dropped my head into my hands, the tears coming hot and fast. There were no words left. There was only the devastating wreckage. I heard him move. I thought he was going to walk out, and I wouldn't have blamed him. But instead, I felt his presence near the desk. I looked up, my vision blurred. He was standing there, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the framed photo on my desk, the one of the two of us in the garage, arms around each other's shoulders, covered in sawdust and smiling like we had the whole world in our hands. He picked it up. He studied it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a calm, deliberate motion, he turned it face down on the desk. The soft thud was the sound of a door slamming shut. I need you to leave the office, Jake, he said, his voice hollow. Don't come back. Don't call me. I'll be in touch with my lawyer. He walked to the door, his steps heavy. He paused, without turning back. And Jake, he said, his voice barely a whisper, don't you dare pray for me. Then he was gone. The rest of the day was a blur of shame and terror. I drove home, but I couldn't go inside. I sat in my driveway for an hour, staring at the beautiful house that my deception had helped pay for. How could I walk in there and look at Chloe? How could I hug my kids? I was a fraud. The life we were living was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide had just come in. When I finally slunk inside, it was dark. Chloe was in the living room reading on the couch. She looked up and smiled, but it faded when she saw my face. Jake? Honey, what's wrong? You look terrible. I collapsed onto the couch next to her. I had practiced a lie in the car, something about the business facing hard times, but I was so tired of lying. The weight of it was crushing me. The words from Mark, "You stood in my living room and ate my wife's lasagna," echoed in my head. I started to cry again, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I didn't know existed inside me. Chloe wrapped her arms around me, alarmed. Jake, talk to me. What is it? Did someone die? I wish it was that simple, I choked out. I clung to her, this good, kind woman who trusted me, and I told her everything. I watched her face transform from concern to confusion to disbelief, and finally to a horrified, heartbroken understanding. She pulled away from me, her hands dropping to her sides. You stole from Mark? She said, her voice small and shaky. From the company? For a year? I could only nod, my head bowed in shame. She stood up, pacing the room, wrapping her arms around herself. All those things you bought? The vacation? The new car? Was that... She couldn't even finish the sentence. Some of it, I admitted, the words tasting like poison. She stopped pacing and looked at me, and the look in her eyes was worse than Mark's rage. It was a deep, profound disappointment. How could you, Jake? He's your best friend. We're their kids' godparents. She shook her head, tears streaming down her own face now. What are we going to do? We're going to lose everything. I know, I whispered. Do you? She shot back, her voice rising for the first time. Do you really? Because I don't think you do. This isn't just about money, Jake. This is about who you are, who I thought you were. She turned and ran up the stairs. I heard our bedroom door shut firmly. The lock clicked into place. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. I had lost my best friend. I was losing my wife. I had humiliated myself and my family. And in the crushing, silent darkness of my living room, I finally understood the cost of my sin. It wasn't a financial cost. It was the trust I had shattered, the relationships I had broken, the man I had destroyed. I fell to my knees on the rug. I had no more words, no more excuses, no more carefully constructed prayers. All I had was a raw, wordless cry that came from the very depths of my spirit. God, I have ruined everything. There was no lightning bolt, no voice from heaven, no feeling of warm comfort, just the oppressive weight of my own failure. But in that silence, for the first time in a year, I wasn't hiding. I was just a broken man on his knees with nowhere left to look but up. The next morning, a formal-looking envelope was delivered by a courier. It was from Mark's lawyer. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a notice of civil suit and a formal buyout offer for my shares of Miller & Thompson Custom Furniture. The offer was for $1. Paperclipped to the back was a small, torn piece of notebook paper. In Mark's familiar, precise handwriting, it read, "The and is broken. It's just Miller now." The $1 bill felt heavy in my hand like a lead weight. It was crisp and new, probably taken straight from the bank just for this cruel piece of theater. I stared at it, lying on my kitchen counter next to the formal buyout agreement. $1 for 8 years of my life, for a friendship, for my soul. It was the price Mark had put on everything we had built, and it was a price I fully deserved. The official letter from his lawyer used words like fiduciary misconduct and fraudulent conversion. My eyes glazed over the legalese, but one phrase jumped out and stuck in my heart like a thorn. The plaintiff, Mark Miller, seeks damages for the full amount misappropriated, plus punitive damages. He was suing me for everything, not just the $400, but for more on top of it, to punish me. A part of me, the proud, broken part, wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage at the injustice of it, to tell myself that he was kicking me when I was down. But the truth, the ugly, humiliating truth, was a whisper I could no longer ignore. You did this. This is the harvest of the seeds you planted. Chloe had been staying with her sister for a week. The house was a tomb. She'd taken the kids. The silence was a physical presence, a constant reminder of the life that was crumbling around me. We spoke only through terse, necessary texts about bills and logistics. The love in her voice was gone, replaced by a flat, procedural tone that hurt more than any yelling ever could. I had to get a job, any job. Our personal accounts were bleeding dry, and the legal fees were just beginning. The thought of updating my resume made me sick. How could I list CEO and co-founder and explain why I left? Terminated for embezzlement. The professional reputation I'd spent a decade building was ash. I ended up at a large home improvement warehouse on the other side of Phoenix, a place where no one knew me. The manager, a guy named Hector with kind eyes and a tired smile, looked over my application. "Says here you were in management, custom furniture." "That's impressive." I just nodded, my throat tight. "We need someone in the lumberyard," he said. "It's hard work. Loading bags of concrete, cutting 2x4s, dealing with the heat. Starts at $15 an hour." It was less than I used to spend on a business lunch. "I'll take it," I said, the words tasting like dust. The work was brutally physical. My soft, office worker hands blistered and bled within the first day. The Arizona sun beat down on the concrete yard, and the dust from the lumber and mulch coated my lungs. I came home every night aching, bone-tired, and stinking of sweat and pine. It was a punishment, and I welcomed it. The physical pain was a distraction from the gaping hole in my chest. One Saturday, about 3 weeks into this new life, I was loading 80-pound bags of quick-reet into a pickup truck. My back was screaming, and a sharp pain shot down my leg with every lift. I was drenched in sweat, my mind numb with the repetition of it. And then I saw them. Mark and Beth were walking through the outdoor garden center holding hands. Beth was pointing at a flowering bush, a smile on her face. Mark had his arm around her, and he was smiling too. A real, genuine smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph or of a man who had won. It was the smile of a man who had found solid ground after an earthquake. They looked peaceful. I froze, a bag of concrete half lifted, the rough paper scraping against my raw hands. The contrast was so violent it took my breath away. There I was, broken, filthy, and drowning in shame. And there they were, whole, clean, and moving on. In that moment, any last shred of self-pity evaporated. This was the consequence. This was the real cost. It wasn't the lawsuit or the lost money or the crappy job. It was this. They were learning to be happy without me. The world was turning, and I was being left behind in the rubble I had created. I ducked behind a stack of plywood before they could see me, my heart hammering with a fresh wave of grief. I finished the shift in a daze. The image of their peaceful faces burned into my mind. That night, the emptiness of the house was unbearable. I couldn't face the silence. I drove to a rundown diner I'd never been to, a place with sticky vinyl booths and the smell of old grease. I slid into a corner booth, ordered a black coffee and a burger I knew I wouldn't eat, and just stared out the window at the passing traffic. I was so tired. Tired of the guilt, tired of the fear, tired of carrying the weight of what I'd done. I felt a prayer form in my mind, not a fancy one, just a simple, exhausted thought. I can't do this. I don't know how to fix any of it. I don't even know how to be sorry enough. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a name tag that read Dolores, refilled my cup. She looked at my untouched food and my face, which must have reflected the storm inside. "Rough day, honey?" she asked, her voice raspy from years of smoke. "Rough life," I mumbled without thinking. She gave a soft, knowing grunt. "Ain't they all?" She didn't offer empty platitudes. She just patted my shoulder lightly with a work-worn hand before moving on to another table. That small, simple gesture of human kindness from a complete stranger was the first thing that had felt real in weeks. It undid me. I sat there in that dingy diner and cried quiet, hopeless tears into my cold coffee. When I finally pulled myself together and asked for the check, Dolores waved a hand. "It's taken care of, sweetie." I looked up, confused. "What? By who?" "Fella who left about 10 minutes ago. Was sitting at the counter. He paid for your meal and told me to tell you—" She squinted, trying to remember the exact words. "To tell you that God hasn't forgotten your address." A shiver went down my spine. It was such a strange, specific thing to say. It wasn't, "God loves you," or "it'll be okay." It was a promise of presence, even in the mess, especially in the mess. I looked around the diner, but there was no one there I recognized, just a truck driver counting his change and a family with a crying baby. I drove home, the burger sitting in a styrofoam container on the passenger seat. My mind was racing. Was it a coincidence? A kind stranger? Or was it something more? I didn't know. But for the first time since everything fell apart, the heavy darkness around me felt a little less absolute. It felt like a single, distant pinprick of light had appeared in the blackness. When I walked into my dark, silent house, I saw the envelope immediately. It was on the floor, slipped under the front door. My heart sank. More legal papers. Another demand. I picked it up with a sigh. It wasn't from a law firm. It was a plain white envelope with my name written on it in a handwriting I didn't recognize. I tore it open. Inside was a greeting card. On the front was a simple picture of a lone tree in a field. I opened it. There was no long message, no signature, just 5 words, written in the same unfamiliar hand. But they were 5 words that sent my world tilting on its axis all over again. I forgive you. Love, Beth. I must have read those 5 words 100 times. I stood there in my entryway, under the harsh glow of the single bulb I'd left on, holding the card like it was made of glass that might shatter. I forgive you. Love, Beth. It made no sense. It was the one thing I never expected, the one reaction I felt I had no right to receive. Anger? Yes. Hatred? Understandable. A lawsuit? Deserved. But this quiet, simple, world-altering statement of grace, it felt like a physical blow, but one that healed even as it hurt. My knees felt weak. I stumbled to the bottom step of the staircase and sat down, the card still in my hand. Beth, Mark's wife, the woman whose family's security I had stolen, the one who had baked the lasagna I'd eaten while betraying them. She forgave me. But how? Why? My mind raced, trying to find the angle, the catch. Was it a trick? A way to get me to drop my guard before the lawsuit? But no, that wasn't Beth. She was steadfast and kind. Her faith a quiet, deep-rooted thing, not a weapon. This was real. This was her. And that made it so much harder to bear. Mark's rage, I could understand. It was a fire I had lit myself. I could stand in its heat and feel the justice of the burn. But Beth's forgiveness, it was like a cool, clean rain on a forest fire I had set. A rain that felt like it was putting out the flames of the punishment I deserved. It felt unearned, and that was the whole terrifying point, wasn't it? I thought about the man in the diner. God hasn't forgotten your address. And now this card. It was too much. It was like a dam breaking inside me. I hadn't been able to pray. Not really, since everything happened. My prayers had been grunts of pain, wordless groans. But sitting there on the steps, holding Beth's forgiveness in my hand, words finally came. I don't understand, I whispered into the empty house. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve any of this. It wasn't a prayer of thanksgiving. It was a confession of my own complete and total bankruptcy. I had nothing to offer. No excuse, no money, no defense. I was a beggar who had just been handed a king's ransom, and I had no idea what to do with it. The next day at the lumberyard, the world looked different. The dust still swirled. The sun still beat down. But the heavy blanket of despair had shifted. It was still there, but a corner had been folded back, letting in a sliver of light. I loaded bags of mulch for a landscaper, my body falling into the familiar, painful rhythm. But my mind was on Beth. I remembered a time, years ago, when Liam and Mark's son, Josh, had gotten into a fist fight over a toy. They were maybe 6 years old. There was yelling, tears, a bloody nose. I had wanted to separate them, to lecture them on sharing. But Beth had just knelt down, put an arm around each crying, furious boy, and said, "It's okay to be angry, but you're still brothers. The anger doesn't get to win." She had sat with them in their mess until the storm passed. She was like that. She understood that forgiveness wasn't about ignoring the wrong. It was about deciding that the relationship was more important than the wrong. Was that what this was? Was she deciding that, what? That I was still family? The thought was so absurd it almost made me laugh. But the card was real. The forgiveness was real. It existed now in the world, a fact as solid as the bags of concrete I was lifting. That evening, I knew I had to see Chloe. I couldn't just text her about this. I drove to her sister's house, my palms sweating on the steering wheel. I hadn't been invited. I parked across the street and texted her. I'm outside. I know I shouldn't be, but I have something I need to show you. You don't have to come out. I waited for 5 long minutes, expecting a reply telling me to leave. But then the front door opened, and Chloe stepped out. She walked slowly toward the car, her arms crossed against the evening chill. She looked tired, but the hard, angry set to her jaw was gone. She just looked sad. I rolled down the window. "Hi," I said, my voice soft. "Hi, Jake." I handed her the card without a word. She took it, her brow furrowed in confusion. She opened it and read it. I watched her face, saw her eyes widen, saw her breath catch. She read it again, then looked at me, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Beth sent this?" she whispered. I nodded. "Slipped it under the door last night." She was silent for a long time, just staring at the 5 words. "Wow," she finally breathed. She looked from the card to me, and for the first time in weeks, she really looked at me. Not at the monster I had become, but at the broken man I was. What does this mean?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "It doesn't change the lawsuit. It doesn't give us our money back. It doesn't fix anything. But," I struggled for the words, "but it feels like someone threw me a life preserver in the middle of the ocean. I'm still drowning, but now I have something to hold onto." A tear traced a path down Chloe's cheek. "She forgave you," she said, almost to herself, "before you even asked." She looked back at the card, and then she did something that shattered me and put me back together all at once. She reached through the car window and placed her hand over mine. It was just a touch, brief and tentative. But it was the first time she had voluntarily touched me since the night I told her. "I'm still so angry, Jake," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so hurt and so scared. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. But if Beth can..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The possibility had entered the world. She pulled her hand back. "I need to go back inside. I understand." She turned and walked back to the house, the card still in her hand. She paused at the door and looked back at me for a moment before disappearing inside. I drove home, my mind reeling. The ice around my heart was cracking. Beth's forgiveness hadn't solved my problems, but it had changed the atmosphere. It had introduced a molecule of hope into the toxic air I'd been breathing. When I got home, I went straight to my laptop. I had been avoiding my email, knowing it would be filled with legal threats and collection notices, but now, fueled by a strange new courage, I opened it. I deleted the spam, ignored the bills, and then I saw it. An email from Mark's lawyer. The subject line was, Miller versus Thompson. My blood ran cold. This was it, the official filing, the beginning of the end. I almost didn't open it, but I thought of Beth's card. I thought of Chloe's hand on mine. I took a deep breath and clicked. The email was brief. It wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was a short, formal message from his lawyer. "Mr. Thompson, please be advised that my client, Mr. Miller, has instructed me to pause all legal proceedings indefinitely. He has offered no explanation for this decision. You will be notified if and when this matter is revisited." I read it 3 times. Pause all legal proceedings. Indefinitely. My hands started to shake. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Beth had forgiven me. And now, Mark was stopping. Why? What had happened between them? I didn't know. But one thing was terrifyingly, beautifully clear. The consequences of my sin were not over. The road ahead was still long and dark. But the avalanche I had been waiting for, the one that was supposed to finally crush me, had suddenly, inexplicably, halted. The lawsuit was paused. The words echoed in the silent house, meaningless and vast, paused. It wasn't over. It wasn't dismissed. It was just waiting, like a monster that had taken a single step back into the shadows, its breath still hot on my face. I felt no relief, only a deeper, more confusing kind of terror. What was he waiting for? Was this some new, more cruel form of punishment? To let me hope before finally destroying me? I couldn't sit in the silence with that thought. I changed out of my work clothes, the smell of sawdust and sweat still clinging to my skin, and drove. I didn't have a destination. I just pointed the car away from my neighborhood and let the street lights wash over me. My mind was a storm of Beth's forgiveness and Mark's withheld judgment. They didn't fit together. It felt like two opposing forces were pulling me apart. I found myself in the parking lot of my old church. It was a Wednesday night, and the lights were on. I could see people moving inside, setting up for a midweek service I hadn't attended in over a year. I killed the engine and sat in the dark, watching. I felt like a ghost looking in on the living. These were people I'd led in prayer, people I'd shared potlucks with. They had no idea the man in the car outside was a thief. I saw Pastor Greg through the window carrying a box of donuts. He was a big man with a gentle smile, the one who had officiated my wedding and baptized my children. He had called me a few times after everything blew up, leaving kind, concerned voicemails I never returned. How could I? What would I say? Sorry I haven't been around, Pastor. I've been busy stealing from my best friend. Shame burned my face. I put the car in reverse, ready to flee back into the darkness where I belonged. But as my headlights swept across the building, they illuminated the simple wooden cross mounted near the door. It wasn't dramatic. It was just there, solid, unchanging. And in that moment, it felt like an accusation. It was a symbol of a forgiveness I was too proud to accept, a grace I was too stubborn to understand. I didn't go in. I drove away, the knot in my stomach tighter than ever. The next morning at the lumber yard, the world felt abrasive and too bright. Every splinter in a 2x4, every grain of dust in my eye, felt like a tiny judgment. Hector, my manager, found me staring blankly at a pallet of roofing shingles. "You all right, Jake?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Just tired, Hector." "Thanks." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "I get it. This work'll grind you down. Listen, I need you to run a delivery. It's a simple one. A couple of sheets of drywall and some joint compound to a remodel over on Elm Street. Address is in the truck. You think you can handle that? A delivery. Getting out of the yard." It sounded like a reprieve. Yeah, I can do that." I loaded the supplies into the company's beat-up flatbed truck and headed out. The address was in a nice quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where Mark and I had once dreamed of building homes filled with our custom furniture. I found the house, a cute bungalow with a dumpster in the driveway, and the sound of a skill saw coming from inside. I backed the truck up and got out, ready to unload. The front door was open, and a man in paint-splattered coveralls came out to meet me. "You the drywall?" he called. "Yes, sir," I said, moving to the back of the truck. And then I froze. The man in the coveralls wasn't a stranger. It was Mark. He froze too. We stood there, 10 feet apart, in the bright sunshine of his client's driveway. He was thinner. There were new lines around his eyes. He held a tape measure in his hand, his knuckles white where he gripped it. The sound of the skill saw inside whined to a stop, leaving a ringing silence. My mouth went dry. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the man I had betrayed, standing in the reality of the life he was now forced to live. He wasn't in our sleek office designing furniture. He was doing manual labor, taking on remodeling jobs to make ends meet because I had bankrupted our company. His eyes, those familiar, intelligent eyes, swept over me, over my company-issued shirt with the hardware store logo, over my dirty jeans, over the truck I was driving. I saw the shock in his face, and then worse, a flicker of something that looked like pity. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. "Jake," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion at all. "Mark," I managed to choke out. I didn't know." "Obviously," he said. He didn't move. He just stood there, a wall of quiet pain and judgment. I had to say something. The words tumbled out, desperate and pathetic. "I got your lawyer's email about pausing the lawsuit. Thank you." He didn't react for a long moment. He just looked at me, and I felt like he could see every rotten, greedy thought I'd ever had. "That wasn't for you," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "Beth asked me to. She said she couldn't hold on to her forgiveness while I was sharpening a legal knife to hold at your throat." He looked away, toward the house he was working on. "So I paused it. For her. Not for you." The truth was like a bucket of ice water. There was no mercy here. There was only the devastating, costly love of a wife for her husband, a love that was, for now, strong enough to restrain his entirely justified rage. My gratitude curdled in my stomach. I was a beneficiary of a grace that had nothing to do with me. I nodded. My head bowed. "I understand." "Do you?" he asked, and for the first time a trace of the old anger seeped into his tone. "Do you have any idea what it cost her to write that card? What it costs me every day to look at my kids and know I can't give them what I promised? This," he gestured at the house, at his coveralls, "this is what you left me. This is the consequence." "I know," I whispered, the words useless. "Then unload the drywall," he said, his voice going cold again. "And then leave." I worked faster than I ever had, my muscles screaming in protest, my face burning with a shame so profound I thought I might vomit. I hauled the heavy sheets off the truck and leaned them against the side of the house. I didn't look at him again. When I was done, I climbed back into the truck. He was still standing there watching me, the tape measure still clenched in his fist. As I put the truck in drive, I saw him turn his back on me and walk into the house. The door didn't slam. It just closed, softly, and finally. I drove back to the lumberyard in a trance. Hector's pity, Beth's forgiveness, Mark's halted lawsuit. It was all just a different kind of pain. It wasn't freeing me. It was showing me the true, staggering dimensions of the prison I had built. That night, I didn't go home. I drove back to the church. This time I didn't park in the shadows. I walked right up to the front doors. They were locked. The service was over. The building was dark and empty. I stood there, alone on the steps. And finally, I stopped fighting. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't beg for forgiveness or a way out. I just finally told the truth to the silent door, to the dark sky, to God. "I am the problem," I said, my voice raw in the quiet night. "It's me. My greed, my pride, my lies. I broke it all. And I don't know how to be anything else." I stood there for a long time, empty and utterly spent. And in that emptiness, a single clear thought rose to the surface, not as a voice, but as a quiet, undeniable knowing in the core of my being. The thought was simple, and it terrified me more than any lawsuit ever could. The pausing of the lawsuit was not the end of your repentance, Jake. It was the beginning. The truth of that thought settled in my bones over the next week. The lawsuit was paused, but my life was not. The consequences weren't frozen. They had just changed shape. They were no longer a terrifying, immediate explosion, but a slow, grinding pressure. I was still broke. I was still working a back-breaking job. My wife and children were still living across town. The only thing that had changed was that I could no longer pretend I was just a victim of my own bad luck. I was reaping what I had sown, and the harvest was going to be long and painful. The number $89,400 was now a ghost that haunted my every waking moment. It was in the price of a gallon of milk. It was in the total on the gas pump. It was in my pathetic biweekly paycheck from the lumberyard. I started doing the math, my scribbled calculations on the back of scrap 2x4s. At $15 an hour, after taxes, how long would it take to pay that back? The answer was years. A decade, maybe more. It was an impossible mountain of a debt, but for the first time, paying it back didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a direction, a purpose. It was something solid I could do in the midst of the overwhelming mess I had created. It wouldn't fix my friendship with Mark. It wouldn't erase the betrayal. But it was a piece of the truth. And I was starving for truth. I went to the bank during my lunch break, still in my dusty work clothes. I smelled of sweat and pine, and I got a few looks from people in suits. I didn't care. I opened a new savings account. I didn't name it anything fancy. In my mind, it was just called the debt. I took the $73 I had in my wallet, my spending money for the week, and deposited it. It was a laughable amount. It was nothing. But it was a start. That small act, that deliberate setting aside of my own comfort for the sake of what I owed, felt more significant than any prayer I'd uttered in years. It was repentance I could touch. It had calluses and a low balance. I started living on nothing. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. I canceled every subscription, every streaming service. I sold the fancy watch I'd bought with the stolen money online for a fraction of what I'd paid. The money went straight into the account. It was slow, agonizingly slow, like trying to fill an ocean with an eyedropper. But every dollar felt like a small stone I was carrying back from the wilderness I'd gotten lost in. One afternoon, I was loading bags of sand onto a pallet when Hector walked over, a serious look on his face. My heart sank. Was I being fired? Had Mark changed his mind and called here, told them who I really was? "Jake," he said, folding his arms. "I've been watching you." I braced myself. "Yeah? You're a hard worker. You don't complain. You show up on time." He paused. "But you look like you're carrying the weight of the world, kid. And you're too smart to be just hauling lumber forever." I didn't know what to say. I just shrugged. "We need a new assistant manager in the plumbing department," he said. "It's not a huge jump, 17 an hour, but it's a path. You'd be dealing with customers, managing inventory. You interested? A raise, a path." It was a hand up, a small mercy I hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away furiously. "Yes, Hector," I said, my voice thick. "Thank you, I'm very interested." He nodded, a satisfied look on his face. "Good. Training starts Monday. Now stop looking so surprised. A man's worth isn't defined by his worst mistake." He walked away, leaving me standing there in a cloud of concrete dust, utterly stunned. It felt like another message, another quiet whisper in this strange new language of grace I was slowly learning to hear. It wasn't a voice from the sky. It was the gruff kindness of a man who saw something broken and decided to offer a tool instead of a kick. The new job was harder in different ways. I had to learn about P-traps and supply lines. And I had to deal with frustrated homeowners with leaky faucets, but the mental challenge was a gift. It forced me to think about something other than my own failure. And the extra money, every single cent of the raise, went directly into the debt account. Weeks turned into a month. The balance grew, slowly, stubbornly. It was just over $1,000, a drop in the bucket, but it was my drop. I had put it there. One evening I was in my backyard, trying to fix a wobbly leg on an old patio chair. It was a simple problem, one that Mark would have solved in 5 minutes with a clever clamp and some wood glue. I was fumbling with it, feeling incompetent, when I heard a car door shut out front. I didn't think much of it. Then I heard the gate to my backyard squeak open. I turned around, a screwdriver in my hand. It was Chloe. She was standing there holding a small duffel bag. The kids weren't with her. My heart leaped into my throat. "Hi," she said. Her voice was quiet, tentative. "Hi," I replied, setting the screwdriver down. "Is everything okay?" She took a few steps closer, looking around the backyard, which was overgrown and messy. I hadn't had the heart or the money to care for it. "The kids are with my mom," she said. She shifted her weight, clutching the duffel bag. I came to get a few more of my things." "Oh," I said, the hope that had flared in my chest instantly deflating. "Okay, of course. Do you need help?" She shook her head. "No, I just—" She trailed off, her eyes meeting mine. They were filled with a deep, weary sadness. "I got a job," she said suddenly, "at the school, as a teacher's aide." "Chloe, that's great," I said, genuinely meaning it. "It doesn't pay much," she continued, "but it's something. I can't rely on you anymore, Jake. I have to be able to stand on my own." Each word was a small, precise cut. She was right. I had made her world unsafe. I had been the foundation, and I had proven to be sand. Now she was building her own foundation, one without me in it. "I understand," I said, my voice soft. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw her taking in my worn-out work clothes, my dirty hands, the humble, broken-down state of the house I was living in. It was a far cry from the successful businessman I had pretended to be. "I saw the bank statement," she said quietly. "The new savings account." I froze. We still had a joint account for bills, but the new one was in my name only. She must have seen a transfer. "I'm not snooping," she said quickly, seeing the look on my face. "It was on the table. I was paying the electric bill." She paused. "You're saving to pay him back." It wasn't a question. I just nodded. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they seemed different. "It's not enough, Jake. It'll never be enough." "I know," I said, "but I have to try. It's the only true thing I can do." She swallowed hard and looked down at the duffel bag in her hands. Then she did something that shattered the last of my defenses. She set the bag down on the patio. "I'm not staying," she said quickly. "I'm not ready for that, but I'm not getting the rest of my things tonight either." She took a shaky breath. "Beth called me. She invited me over for coffee. She told me about seeing you at the diner. And about the card." I stood there, completely still, not daring to breathe. "She said forgiveness isn't a light switch," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "She said it's more like learning to walk again after your legs have been broken. It's painful and slow, and you fall down a lot, but you have to try to take a step." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a fragile, terrifying hope. "This isn't a step back towards you, Jake. This is just me stopping my retreat." She turned and walked back through the gate, leaving the duffel bag sitting on the cracked patio pavement. I listened to her car start and drive away. The backyard was silent again, but the silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. I looked down at the wobbly chair. I picked up my screwdriver. My hands were no longer shaking. The debt was still immense. My wife was still gone. My best friend still hated me. But for the first time since the world ended, I felt a sense of grim, quiet purpose. The path ahead was going to be long and hard, but I could finally see it. And I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than feeling, that I wouldn't be walking it alone. Something else was at work, putting tools in my hands and quiet courage in my heart, one painful step at a time. The duffel bag sat on the patio for 3 days. I walked past it a dozen times a day, a silent, tan-colored monument to the fragile, terrifying possibility that had entered my life. I didn't touch it. Moving it felt like it might break some unseen spell. Chloe wasn't home, but her retreat had halted. That was everything. The new purpose I felt was like a low-grade fever. It was a constant, humming presence that changed everything. Work at the hardware store was no longer just a punishment. It was my quarry, the place where I would mine the rock to rebuild what I had shattered. I learned about PVC pipe and toilet flappers with a focus that bordered on obsession. I helped frustrated homeowners not just because it was my job, but because it was a practice in being useful, in being a small part of a solution instead of the cause of a problem. The balance in the debt account grew, $1,500, then $2,000. It was a pittance, but it was my pittance. Every dollar was a silent apology, a brick in a foundation I was laying in the dark, not knowing if anyone would ever build on it again. One Thursday evening, I was in the plumbing aisle, helping an elderly man find a specific washer for a leaky faucet that had been plaguing him for weeks. It was a tiny 50-cent part. We found it, and the gratitude on his face was disproportionate to the act. "You have no idea what this means," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The dripping, it was driving me crazy at night. "Thank you, son." Son? The word landed softly in my heart. I hadn't been called that in a long time. It was a small thing, a kindness from a stranger, but it felt like a note of music in a song I was only just beginning to hear. As the man left, I turned and saw a woman standing at the end of the aisle, watching me. It was Beth. My breath caught. She was holding a gallon of paint, her cart filled with rollers and tape. She looked calm, but there was a nervous energy in the way she stood. We hadn't spoken since the day everything fell apart. We hadn't even been in the same room. For a moment, we just looked at each other across a display of wrenches. The air was thick with all the unspoken things between us. The lasagna, the stolen college funds, the card she'd sent that had changed the axis of my world. I was the one who broke the silence. I walked toward her slowly, my hands held slightly away from my sides as if approaching a skittish animal. "Beth," I said, my voice quiet. "Hi. Jake," she replied. Her eyes searched my face, and I let her look. I had nothing left to hide. I got your card," I said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "Thank you. You didn't have to. I don't deserve—" I trailed off, unable to finish any of those sentences truthfully. "I know I didn't have to," she said softly. "That's the point." She adjusted her grip on the paint can. "We're redoing Josh's room. He wants a space theme." I nodded, a painful lump in my throat. I was missing it. I was missing my godson growing up, missing the simple, mundane milestones of a family I had been a part of. "Beth, I began, but she held up a hand, stopping me. "Don't," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Don't apologize again. Not to me, not here." She took a breath. "An apology is just words, Jake. What you're doing—" She glanced around the store, at my logoed shirt, and then back at my eyes. "This is the apology. This is what matters." Tears welled in my eyes, and I didn't try to stop them. She saw it. She saw the tiny, difficult steps I was taking. Her forgiveness wasn't a blanket absolution. It was an acknowledgement of the struggle. It was costly. And she was paying attention. "How is he?" I asked, the question tearing out of me. Her expression softened with a deep, weary sadness. "He's surviving. The remodeling jobs are hard on his hands. He misses the design work. He misses—" She didn't say "you," but the word hung in the air between us. "He's angry, and he has every right to be." "I know," I whispered. "He knows you're working here," she said, her gaze steady. "He knows you're trying to pay it back." A cold dread trickled down my spine. "How?" "I told him," she said simply. I told him about the savings account. I told him because hiding the truth is what got us into this mess, and because he needs to see it too. The thought of Mark knowing about my pathetic attempts at restitution was a fresh wave of humiliation. It felt like being naked in front of a judge. But beneath the shame, there was a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, all of it. There were no more shadows to hide in. He thinks it's a stunt, Beth continued, her voice barely audible. He thinks you're doing it to look good for the judge. Whenever the lawsuit continues, the words hurt, but they were fair. I would have thought the same thing if our roles were reversed. I'm not, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. I swear to you, Beth, I'm not. It's the only thing that makes me feel human. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes seeing right through to the core of my brokenness. I believe you, she said finally, and those 3 words felt like a benediction. But my belief isn't the one that needs changing. She gave me a small, sad smile, then turned and pushed her cart toward the checkout. I stood there, surrounded by the tools of repair, feeling more seen and more exposed than I ever had in my life. That night, I went home to an empty house that felt a little less like a prison. Chloe's duffel bag was still on the patio. I finally brought it inside, placing it gently at the foot of the stairs. It wasn't a promise of return, but it was a sign that the door was no longer slammed shut. I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad. I started writing. Not an apology, but a plan. A detailed, multi-year, brutal budget. How much I could save from every paycheck. How long it would take to pay back every single cent with interest at my current salary. The number of years was daunting. It was a life sentence. But as I stared at the page filled with my own handwriting, a quiet certainty settled over me. This was my penance. This was the road. It was long and it was hard, and I had no guarantee of what, if anything, waited for me at the end of it. Reconciliation with Mark felt like a distant, impossible dream. A restored marriage was a flickering candle in a strong wind. This wasn't about earning forgiveness. I was finally beginning to understand that I never could. This was about obedience. It was about facing the truth of what I had done and walking directly into the consequences. Not because it would save me, but because it was the only right thing left to do. The path of grace, I was learning, wasn't a smooth, paved road to a better life. It was a narrow, difficult trail that led directly through the heart of your own failure. And you had to walk every single step of it. I folded the budget and put it in my wallet. Then I got down on my knees beside my kitchen chair, in the quiet of the house, and I didn't ask for a thing. I just sat in the silence, a broken man with a plan, finally ready to walk the long road home. The budget in my wallet became my Bible. Its numbers were my liturgy, its projections my prayer. I lived and breathed its grim reality. Every can of soup I didn't buy, every movie I didn't stream, every mile I walked instead of driving felt like a small, hard-won victory. The balance in the debt account crept upward with the agonizing slowness of a glacier. $2,500. $3,000. It was a mountain, and I was moving it 1 teaspoon at a time. The physicality of my life was a constant reminder. My body ached in new ways, from the lifting and hauling. The softness of my CEO life was gone, replaced by lean muscle and a network of small cuts and bruises. I looked like the man I should have been all along, a working man, a man who built things with his hands, not one who destroyed them with lies. One rainy Tuesday, I was stocking shelves in the plumbing department when a familiar voice echoed from the next aisle over. It was Pastor Greg. He was asking an employee about a specific type of pipe fitting for a leak under his kitchen sink. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't spoken to him since my world collapsed. I thought about hiding in the stockroom, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The truth was, I was tired of hiding. I took a deep breath, walked around the end cap, and found him looking confused at a wall of PVC connectors. "You'll need a 3/4-inch slip joint coupling," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm. He turned, and his eyes widened in genuine shock. "Jake?" He looked from my face to my name tag and work shirt, the pieces clicking into place. The shock in his eyes melted into a deep, profound sadness. "Jake," he said again, softer this time. "Hi, Pastor Greg." We stood there for a moment in the buzzing fluorescence of the aisle. The last time he'd seen me, I was teaching a men's group about integrity. "I heard there were some troubles," he said carefully, his kind eyes searching mine. "I called you." "I know. I'm sorry I didn't call back. I didn't know what to say." It was the most honest thing I'd said to him in years. He nodded, accepting this. He held up the broken piece of pipe. "So, a 3/4-inch slip joint coupling?" "Yeah, and you'll need some plumber's putty too. I'll show you." I led him to the right section, my movements automatic, professional. I handed him the parts he needed. He took them, his hand brushing mine. "Thank you, Jake." He paused. "How are you?" Really? The simple question, asked with such naked compassion, almost undid me. How was I? I was a bankrupt, a fraud, a man whose wife lived across town and whose best friend couldn't stand the sight of him. I was saving every spare penny to pay back a debt that would take a decade to clear. I met his gaze. "I'm in the truth," I said, the words surprising me as I said them. "It's a hard place, but it's where I am." Pastor Greg's eyes glistened. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't quote a Bible verse. He just reached out and squeezed my shoulder, a firm, solid grip. "The truth is a good place to be," he said quietly. "It's the only place where God can start building something new." He paid for his items and left, giving me one last long look before he walked out into the rain. His words settled in me. The only place where God can start building something new. I wasn't seeing any building. All I saw was the wreckage. But for the first time, I considered that maybe the demolition had to be complete before the new foundation could be laid. A few days later, a customer returned a high-end power tool, a brand new, cordless drill kit that was worth nearly $400. As I processed the return, a dangerous, fleeting thought crossed my mind. The system was sometimes slow to update inventory. I could easily set this aside, take it home, and sell it online. No one would know. It would be a huge boost to the debt account. The old me, the greedy, entitled me, latched onto the idea like a lifeline. I held the heavy drill kit in my hands. Its potential a dark temptation. It would be so easy. Just one more lie. One more theft to help pay for the last one. But then I saw Beth's eyes in my memory. This is the apology. I heard Pastor Greg's voice. The truth is a good place to be. I felt the weight of the budget in my pocket. A budget built on honesty, however difficult. My hands trembled. The choice felt monumental. It wasn't about the drill. It was about who I was going to be from this moment forward. Was I a thief who was sorry he got caught, or was I a man being changed? One brutal, honest choice at a time. I took a shaky breath, walked over to the inventory computer, and processed the return properly. I tagged the kit and put it on the shelf for resale. My heart was pounding, but it was a clean, clear feeling. I had passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. For the first time, I had chosen integrity over expediency, not because anyone was watching, but because it was right. It was a small victory, but it felt bigger than any business deal I'd ever closed. That weekend, Chloe asked if I wanted to see the kids. It wasn't a suggestion of a family outing. It was a carefully worded text. I'm taking Liam and Emma to the park on Saturday at 10. You're welcome to come by for a little while. It was a trial run, a test of my new, less dangerous self. I arrived early and watched from a distance as they played on the swings. My children. They looked older. Liam had a new confidence in his climb up the monkey bars. Emma's laughter carried across the grass, a sound I realized I'd been starving for. When Chloe saw me, she gave me a small, cautious wave. I walked over, my heart in my throat. "Hey." "Guys," I said, my voice thick. "Daddy!" Emma yelled, launching herself off the swing and into my legs. I scooped her up, burying my face in her hair, inhaling the simple, little girl smell of her. It was a pain so sweet it was almost unbearable. Liam looked up from the top of the monkey bars. "Hey, Dad," he said, with a quiet reserve that broke my heart. He was old enough to know something was very wrong. We spent an hour together. We pushed swings. I helped Liam cross the monkey bars. We didn't talk about the past or the future. We just existed in the fragile present. I was hyper-aware of every word, every gesture, trying to be safe, trying to be trustworthy. When it was time to go, Chloe gathered their things. "We should get going," she said. "Liam has a birthday party." I nodded, the familiar ache of loss returning. "Okay. Thank you. For this." She nodded. As she turned to leave, Liam hesitated. He walked back to me, his small face serious. "Dad," he said, "Mom says you're working really hard to fix a big mistake." I knelt down so I was at his eye level. "Yeah, buddy, I am." "Are you going to fix it?" he asked, his eyes wide and hopeful. I looked at my son and I told him the truth. "I'm going to try every single day for the rest of my life," I said. "That's a promise." He considered this, then gave a single decisive nod. "Okay." He turned and ran to catch up with his mom and sister. I drove home, the ghost of my daughter's laughter and the weight of my son's trust warring inside me. The path was still long. The debt was still immense. But I had held my children. I had chosen honesty over a stolen drill. I had spoken to my pastor without flinching. I was still in the ruins, but as I walked through my front door, I realized something for the first time. I was no longer just staring at the wreckage in despair. I was on my knees, clearing it away, one honest, painful piece at a time. The building hadn't started, but the site was finally being prepared. The promise to my son became the new fire in my bones, every single day for the rest of my life. It wasn't a dramatic oath sworn on a Bible. It was a quiet commitment spoken on a sun-drenched patch of grass, and it settled into my soul with the weight of a vow. The budget was no longer just a financial plan. It was a covenant. Life developed a new, stripped-down rhythm. Work. Save. See my kids when Chloe allowed it. Repeat. The glamour was gone, but so was the frantic, desperate energy of my old life. There was a grim peace in the simplicity. I was dealing in facts, not fantasies. The fact was, I owed a debt. The fact was, I would pay it. One afternoon, I was in the back stockroom, breaking down cardboard boxes. The store was quiet. Hector found me, a strange expression on his face, a mix of concern and something else I couldn't quite read. "Jake," he said, leaning against the metal shelving. "You got a minute?" "Sure, Hector. What's up?" He folded his arms. "I got a call from a guy named Mark Miller." The world tilted. The cardboard box in my hands slipped and clattered to the concrete floor. My mouth went dry. What did he say?" "He asked if you worked here." I told him yes. Then he asked about you. Not in a nasty way, just asked. Hector studied me. "He said you used to be partners." I nodded, unable to speak. "He asked if you were a good worker." I told him the truth. I said you were one of the best I've got. Hardworking, honest, that you'd taken a demotion to assistant manager without a word of complaint when we had to cut back hours. Hector paused. He was quiet for a long time after I said that. Then he just said, "Thank you," and hung up. I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. Mark had called. He had sought out a report on my character. He had heard the word honest used to describe me. The contradiction of that must have been screaming in his mind. "You want to tell me what that was about?" Hector asked, his voice gentle. I looked at my boss, this man who had given me a chance when no one else would. "I betrayed him, Hector," I said. "The truth now, my only currency. I stole a lot of money from our company. I lied to him for a year. He's the reason I'm here." Hector didn't look shocked. He just nodded slowly, as if I'd finally confirmed a suspicion he'd long held. "Well," he said, rubbing his jaw. He didn't sound like a man who wanted to cause you more trouble. He sounded curious. Curious. The word echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. It was a far cry from forgiveness, but it was a universe away from the pure, unadulterated hatred I had seen in his eyes in that driveway. Curiosity was a crack in the door, a tiny, almost invisible fissure in the wall between us. A few nights later, I was sitting at my kitchen table, the house silent around me. I had my budget spreadsheet open, but I wasn't really seeing it. I was thinking about Mark's phone call. I was thinking about Beth's card. I was thinking about the cost of it all, not the financial cost, but the human one. The cost of Beth's forgiveness was her having to plead with her husband to pause his rightful vengeance. The cost of my repentance was this daily, grinding humility. I thought about the cross not as a piece of jewelry or a symbol on a wall, but as a place where a debt was paid. I'd heard that my whole life, but for the first time, I felt I understood a fraction of its weight. True forgiveness, I was learning, always costs the forgiver something. It cost Beth her sense of justice. It was costing Mark his rage. And my repentance, my true repentance, was costing me my pride, my comfort, my entire old self. It was in that quiet, painful clarity that I knew what I had to do. It wasn't enough to just pay the money back silently. That was still hiding. Repentance required facing the one you wronged. My hands were shaking as I pulled a clean sheet of paper from the drawer. I picked up a pen. I didn't write a plea. I didn't write an excuse. I wrote a declaration. "Mark, I'm not writing to ask for anything. I know I have no right. I'm writing to tell you that I have opened a separate account. As of today, the balance is $3,220. It is for you. Every penny I can save beyond basic survival goes into it. I will continue to do this until the full amount of $89,400, plus a fair interest, is repaid. This is not a negotiation. It is not a legal strategy. It is a debt I owe, and I am paying it. It will take me years. I know that. But I will not stop. You may never speak to me again. I understand that too. But you deserve to know that I am doing the one true thing I can. Jake." I didn't sign it "Love" or "Your friend." I just signed my name. I found an envelope, addressed it, and put a stamp on it. I walked it to the corner mailbox before I could lose my nerve. The clang of the metal door closing was the sound of a final bridge being burned, or perhaps the first stone of a new one being laid. I walked back to my dark, empty house. There were no flashing lights, no feeling of spiritual euphoria. There was only the cold, clear knowledge that I had done the next right thing. I had stepped out of the shadows and into the light of Mark's judgment, whatever it may be. I went to bed and slept a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in over a year. The next morning was a Sunday. I woke up early. The silence of the house felt different. It was no longer accusing. It was waiting. I got dressed in the only suit I still owned and drove to church. I didn't park in the back. I didn't slink in late. I walked in through the front doors, my head held not in pride, but in a simple acknowledgement of where I was. I was a sinner in need of grace. I belonged here as much as anyone. I took a seat in the very back row. A few people noticed me. I saw the surprise on their faces, then the careful, neutral masks that fell into place. I didn't blame them. I just sat there. When the music started, I didn't sing. I had no song left in me. I just listened. When Pastor Greg got up to speak, his eyes scanned the congregation and landed on me. He didn't stare. He just gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "I see you, and you are welcome here." He preached on the prodigal son, not on the son partying in the far country, but on the long, dusty walk home. He talked about how repentance isn't just feeling sorry, but the arduous journey back to the truth. He said the father saw the son a long way off, not because he had supernatural vision, but because he was watching the road every single day waiting for a sign of his son's return. I sat in the back row, a grown man in a cheap suit, and I wept. I wept for the long road I was on. I wept for the father I had betrayed, not my earthly one, but my heavenly one. And for the first time, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone was watching the road for me too. The service ended. People began to file out. I stayed in my seat, letting the crowd pass, giving myself a moment to collect the shattered pieces of my heart. Then I felt a presence beside me. I looked up. It was Mark. He was standing at the end of my row, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead at the now empty cross at the front of the church. His face was a battlefield of emotions, anger, grief, and that same terrible curiosity. My breath froze in my lungs. The entire world shrunk to the space between us. He didn't speak for a full minute. The last of the congregation trickled out, leaving us alone in the vast, silent sanctuary. Finally, he turned his head. His eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted, met mine. "I got your letter," he said, his voice rough like gravel. Those 4 words hung in the sacred silence of the empty church. "I got your letter." They weren't shouted. They weren't hissed. They were just stated. A simple, heavy fact laid between us on the wooden pew. I couldn't speak. I could only look at him, waiting for the rest, waiting for the axe to fall. He looked away from me, back toward the front of the church. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched. $89,400, he said, the number sounding like a death sentence in the quiet space. "You think you can just pay that back and it's over?" "No," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I don't." That seemed to surprise him. He glanced back at me. "Then why? Why the letter? Why the account?" This was it, the moment of absolute truth. No more hiding behind business jargon or spiritual cliches. "Because the money is the one thing I can measure," I said, my hands gripping the pew in front of me. "The rest of it, the trust, the friendship, what I did to your family, I can't put a number on that. I can't fix that. I know that. But the money, that's a debt I can work on every day. It's the only way I know how to say I'm sorry without using words that don't mean anything anymore." He was silent, absorbing this. The anger in his posture seemed to deflate, replaced by a profound, weary exhaustion. He sank into the pew, one row in front of me, turning sideways to face me. We weren't friends having a conversation. We were 2 survivors of a shipwreck assessing the damage. "Beth showed me the budget," he said quietly. "The one you wrote out by hand. She found it when she was getting something from Chloe's bag." I flinched. I hadn't known Chloe had shown it to her. The intimacy of that, my desperate, private road map being passed between the 2 women I had most wronged, was excruciating. All those years projected out, he continued, his voice distant. "You really think you're going to be doing this for 10 years? "If that's what it takes," I said. "Yes." He shook his head. a short, disbelieving motion. "I called your work, Hector. He said you were honest." He almost laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "He said you were the best he's got." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "I wanted to hate you," Mark said, his voice dropping so low I had to lean forward to hear him. "I have hated you. It felt like a fire in my chest, and I was glad for it. It kept me warm. It kept me going." He looked down at his hands, the hands of a designer that were now calloused from manual labor. But this slow, stubborn digging. This isn't the Jake I thought I knew. The Jake I knew would have run. He would have declared bankruptcy, moved to another state, invented some new story for himself. He was right. The old Jake would have. "That man is gone," I said, the truth of it solid in my core. "He died in the wreckage." Mark looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time since he'd walked into the church. He saw the cheap suit, the lines of stress on my face, the raw humility in my eyes. He saw a man who had been stripped bare. "Beth's forgiveness," he began, struggling with the words. "It cost her. It cost us. We fought about it. I told her she was a fool. I told her you'd just see it as weakness." He paused, his throat working. "But she said it wasn't for you. She said it was for her. She said holding on to the anger was like drinking poison and waiting for you to die." Tears welled in my eyes. I knew that cost now. I understood the terrible price of setting a burden down. "I can't do what she did," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't just forgive you. Not like that. It's not in me right now." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "But I can't hold on to the hate either. It's too heavy. It's breaking me." He stood up abruptly, as if he couldn't bear to sit still any longer. He walked a few paces down the aisle, then turned back. "The lawsuit," he said. "I'm dropping it." The air left my lungs. I stared at him, stunned. "It's not forgiveness," he said sharply, holding up a hand to stop whatever he thought I might say. "It's a truce, a ceasefire. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of paying lawyers. I'm tired of thinking about you every waking moment." He pointed a finger at me, his hand trembling slightly. "But the debt stands. You understand? You keep your account. You keep paying. Not because the court is making you, but because you said you would. Because you owe it." I nodded, unable to form words. This was grace. Not the warm, fuzzy kind, but the severe, costly kind. It was grace that held me to my promise. It was grace that believed I could be a man of my word, even after I had proven myself not to be. "Okay," I managed to whisper. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. Then he turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed in the empty sanctuary, each one a beat in the rhythm of this new, painful reality. He paused at the large double doors, his hand on the push bar. He didn't look back. "Don't stop, Jake," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "Don't you dare stop." Then he was gone. I sat in the pew for a long time, long after the sound of his car had faded from the parking lot. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows, painting colored light on the floor. I thought about the cost to Beth, who had forgiven at great personal expense, the cost to Mark, who had to lay down his weapon to save his own soul, the cost to me, which was every comfortable lie I had ever told myself. This was what repentance really cost. It cost everything. It wasn't a one-time prayer, it was a daily surrender. It was the long, obedient road back, paved with humility and paid for with the currency of your old life. I stood up and walked out of the church. The Arizona sun was bright and warm on my face. The world looked the same, but I was different. The path ahead was still long. The debt was still owed. My family was still fractured, but I was free, not from the consequences, but from the lie. I was finally, fully, in the truth. And for the first time, I understood that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only place where God's grace could truly reach me. It was the only ground solid enough to build a new life upon. I got in my car and drove home. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew what I had to do today, and tomorrow, and for all the days after that. I had to keep my promise.